Hey guys, welcome back to the TD Fitness channel. This is episode number 24. No more diets or generic exercise plans. How to effectively personalize your plan for healthy living. So what's the question we're answering in this episode? You know, I'm always trying to help you find ways to live a healthier life. And what I've found is that most people actually lean towards something that has either worked for someone else or, quite frankly, something that is marketed well. So the question we're answering here is what will actually work for you? I want you to make healthy changes by forgetting what you've been told and doing what you know. And I'll explain a little bit later what I mean by that. This is important because the thing that works for you is the thing that is most sustainable. Because if it's the most sustainable, then you're able to maintain it over time and stay consistent with it. And we call that lifestyle change. So if you're looking for ways to live healthier, not through fads or grasping for things that you hope will work, then this episode will be helpful to give you a few tangible steps on how to implement change that works for you. The takeaway here is that your personalized plan has to focus on making your positive habits healthier and more frequent or more consistent, and make your negative habits less harmful and less frequent. So the roadmap we're going to kind of follow in this episode really involves 3 points. The first is that everyone is different. Secondly, it's the concept of incremental change. And third, I'm going to go over 2 pillars for personalizing your plan for healthy living. So point number 1, everyone is different. You know, I've said before that not all diets are bad, but we tend to focus on the wrong things when it comes to diets that we try to follow. We assume that that diet was created for us, but it absolutely wasn't. Think about the popular diets today. Do you feel like that was created for you? Do you feel like that was created for any one person in particular? Most of the time, the answer is no. Diets are created and marketed so that they can be sold to a big group of people, a massive population, because it's about revenue, right? So you have to understand, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you have to understand where they're coming from. You know, I'm reading a book called The Blue Ocean Strategy, and it's a business book, and it talks about how successful companies don't seek to compete with companies in their own market space, if you will, but rather they create new areas of the market altogether. So it explains that the competitive environment is deemed a red ocean when there's so much competition and everyone is fighting for the same market shares, the same customers and things like that. So the point of the book is to look for blue oceans, meaning try to look for something new that hasn't been done before. Create a niche or create an offshoot of something that there is not as much competition, because that's where you can excel and that's where you can make the biggest difference. And the point is to kind of chart your own territory and define your own waters, because new markets equals new opportunities and, as the book puts it, blue oceans. I thought that as I read that, I felt like it was applicable to this topic as well, because I feel like we forced ourselves to stay bound and constrained by several existing constructs or systems for living healthier. One is the construct or the system that says you have to lose weight. The other is that you have to cut calories. Another is that you have to eat this and not that. And when we step into these constructs, we inevitably have to play by those rules, because that's how success is measured. But I go back to the point that everyone is different. Maybe cutting calories works for someone. Maybe exercising 6 times a week works for someone. But what works for everyone is improving over where you are right now, ever so slightly. Improve what you're doing right now. That will always be applicable no matter who you are. And it has to be personal and unique to you. And that is one way that I've found that it can truly be personal and unique to you, your situation, your life, your diet. This is really what the Fit Life program is all about. That's why I created it, trying to find a way to create a holistic system for lifestyle change that can be applied no matter what level you're at, no matter how good you think your diet is, no matter how good or bad you think your exercise habits are. When you start with where you are right now and just try to improve, just try to make things better, that inherently creates a personalized approach to healthy living. Otherwise, you try to follow the rules of the system of whatever diet you're following or whatever generic exercise plan you're following. You just try to follow those rules as closely as possible because you think, well, it worked for so-and-so, so hopefully it'll work for me too. But here's the thing. You are not your friend. And you're not the photoshopped model on the cover of the magazine, and you're not the bodybuilder that's paid to demonstrate that latest exercise machine on a late night infomercial. You are you, and you should start exactly where you are. You are exactly where you need to be. That is one of the first things I tell people when we start with the Fit Life program. You are exactly where you need to be. All of your experiences up until this point, whether you deem them successes or failures, they have helped to inform your worldview and really define where you are right now. And that's fine because we're starting right here. So think about it. You're doing a lot of things correctly already, whether you think so or not. You were doing a lot of things well, but there's always room for improvement. Now, I know that there is comfort in having a system of rules to follow. I mean, that's why people come to me for exercise plans, right? Some people just don't want to think about what they need to do, but they would rather just be told what to do. But those aren't generic exercise plans. Those are personalized plans. Most diets are generic. Exercise DVDs are generic. Again, they weren't made specifically for you or me. Now, I know that I've said before that for many of us, what you do isn't as important as the fact that you do something, especially if you're sedentary. And I still stand by that. But once you're doing something, you want to make sure what you're doing is effective and it will lead to the results that you're looking for. The thing is that everyone can personalize a diet or an exercise plan simply by improving the actions that they're taking right now. So think about it. Does your diet lack vegetables? Maybe just add 1 serving a day. Guess what? That's your new diet. It doesn't have to be something you pay hundreds of dollars for with nutrition plans and so forth. Your diet is something that is catered to you, so it takes your current situation and simply makes an improvement, one small step at a time. Now, I also understand that we all like to measure progress, typically through numbers. But what I would offer is that diets that encourage you to measure progress by seeing how many pounds you've lost or how many calories you've reduced may not necessarily be the best approach. A better way to determine how well you're doing is to measure performance goals, not outcome goals. You've heard me say that before. Outcome goals are things that you can't directly control. Things like, how much weight did I lose? You don't have any direct control over that. You have inputs that hopefully result in weight loss, but there are a lot of variables that actually go into weight loss. Performance goals are things that you can control. So, did I meet my goal for servings of vegetables today? That is something you have direct control over. And by giving yourself control, it changes your mindset and allows you to better measure progress because those performance metrics become habits. And habits endure over time and lead to a healthier life. Now, the initial discomfort, if you will, of of creating your own plan, some people get a little anxious when they think about, okay, I'm going to be out here on my own. I'm just going to kind of wing it and try to make things better where I can. I can see how that can be a little discomforting. But really, the discomfort is in just the initial thought of doing that. You'll see how easy and how effortless your plan can be because it's your plan. That's the whole point. It's catered to you, and you really didn't have to do anything but think about improvements, think better. And you can still measure progress, but the basis of comparison moves away from that system that you were following and over to the changes or improvement in your current state. And that's precisely because it's catered to you. So, point number 2, incremental change. In the last episode, I talked about completing a long distance endurance event, like a triathlon, for example. I talked about whether or not you are starting at barely being able to walk a mile, or whether your goal is to do a 5K or to run a half marathon or a marathon, or maybe to complete a triathlon. It really doesn't matter because the fundamentals are the same. So let's just say that your goal is to walk or complete a half marathon. And right now you are able to walk a mile, and that's it. So the way we go about reaching the goal of a half marathon is through this concept of incremental change. Think little by little. Now, if you can walk a mile, then I would probably program something like a mile walk until you're comfortable with that. And then you can move up to maybe 1.2 or 1.5 miles. And then you can move on once you're comfortable with that and you can adequately complete that distance. Then maybe you'd move up to 2.5 miles. But as the miles grow, the increments that you have to increase, or that you should increase, don't just stay small, they grow over time. So bigger changes become easier over time. When it comes to training for a triathlon, I tell people, if you can swim for 30 minutes, then you can swim for 50 minutes because you're doing it the right way. You're not exerting more effort in doing that. You're simply maintaining a technique. And if you can run for 10 miles, then you can run for 20 minutes more and go 12 miles. And if you add one fruit or vegetable to your diet each day, you do that for a few days, and then add 2. You do that for a few days, practice that, and then add 3, and so on. When you get up to adding 5 or 7, it becomes easy because you've already established the habit patterns. You're no longer bound by the small increments in change because now you have a solid foundation, a solid habit to build upon, and the bigger changes, the bigger improvements are made so much easier. The fact is that incremental change builds on itself. I'm reminded of a quote by Seth Godin, who you know that I quote rather often, and he says that each of us is capable of just a little more. And if you can do a little more, then of course you can repeat those changes until you've done a lot more. I came across a quote in an article I read recently by an individual by the name of Brian Grasso. It was in an article called Eliminate Your Limits, and it's in a magazine that I subscribe to called Personal Fitness Professional, or PFP magazine. And he says, the question has never been about understanding how to succeed. It's been about understanding why they aren't succeeding. You can't build your home on quicksand, and you can't build successes on limitations. See, often we ask, how do I succeed? But another way to look at it is to ask, why am I not succeeding? In other words, what can I improve? And this does 2 things. When you ask, what can I improve, it personalizes it for you. That's the first thing. And secondly, as I talked about before, it changes the measurement from that system or construct that you were using to your own measures of improvement, which is based on past performance. And if you're making things better, then you are improving on your performance. You're making things better, not perfect, and not compared to someone else's scale. So point number 3. I think there are 2 pillars for personalizing your plan for healthy living. Initially, I had this in 5 steps, but as I thought through it and kind of reworked it, really it comes down to 2 broad pillars for healthy living that you can use to personalize your plan for healthy living, I should say. The first is you want to start with the healthy things, those healthy characteristics that you are already doing, the things that you like to do, and you want to make those healthy practices better. How do you make them better? By making them either healthier or practicing them more often. I feel like this approach focuses on the positive versus the negative. And when it comes to thinking of things from a behavior change standpoint, as you know, as a health coach, I'm very much interested in the behavioral aspect because I want to help you instill positive habits. It's not just about programming an exercise plan. It's not just about programming or providing dietary assessments. We're looking to make some positive long-term changes. And a big part of that is your mindset, right? So from a behavior change standpoint, it's so much easier to add something to what you're doing than it is to take something away, right? So, for example, are you a pasta lover? Think about ways that you can make that healthier. Maybe you could incorporate some whole grain or whole wheat pasta. Maybe you could use some veggie pasta from time to time. Those little steps are all going to be improvements over just your refined white grain type pastas. Do you like fruits? Okay, maybe incorporate some different types of fruits so that you can have a variety or an array of different fruits that provide different types of nutrients to you. Do you like to play tennis? Maybe you don't like to exercise, but you do like to play tennis and you like some sports. Deliberately try to find a way to incorporate tennis into your life. All of these are things or examples of things that you can do to improve your current state. Now, there are 4, I'll call them rules that come to mind when I think about making decisions and making changes. The first is that there is not a best decision. And this sometimes flies in the face of what we believe. We get so wrapped up around what is it exactly that I should be doing because I don't want to pick the wrong thing. But the fact is, the first rule, there is not a best decision. Rule number 2 is that there are many, many good decisions, many that will work, many that are equally healthy or that have differing healthy characteristics, and they can all be good. When I think about that from a diet standpoint, the perfect diet doesn't exist. Many different approaches could work for you. If you think about it from an exercise standpoint, go back to episode number 22 where we discussed the exercise routine that's working for me right now. There are so many ways that I could incorporate exercise in my life that would achieve the same results for fitness. But the point of that episode was to provide an example and demonstrate that plans are different and different approaches work for different people. And as I think about life in general with this concept that there are many good decisions and many things that would work, think about your job. There are probably several things that you could do in a different job or at another company that you would be just as happy doing. Where do you live? There are probably a lot of other places in the world that you could live that would make you just as happy. There are numerous examples. But that brings us to, I'll call it rule number 3. While there is not a best decision and there are many good decisions, there are also bad decisions, okay? And those bad decisions are things like the no-brainers, things like smoking. That is a bad decision. Driving with your eyes closed or driving while texting. Those are notable bad decisions. But rule number 4, which is the one that this episode is really centered around, is that there are always better choices. So it's not about perfection. It's about being better. Better equals healthier and more often. So make the things that you do now healthier and or try to incorporate them more often. So the second pillar for personalizing your plan for healthy living is that you want to identify what I call red lines and look for alternatives to those red lines. So for the longest time, for most of my life, actually, it wasn't until the last year or two that I could stomach Brussels sprouts. That I just have never liked Brussels sprouts. Beets is another thing that I don't like. So for me, those have been red lines, hard and fast, throughout my entire life. I don't eat Brussels sprouts, don't eat beets. When you set your red line, that gives you an idea of what you are not willing to do, and you have to determine what you're not willing to do before you can define what you will do. I kind of look at this as a spectrum. On the left-hand side, I have kind of my bookend of I'm not going to go any farther left than this. So I'm not going to go over into the Brussels sprouts or beets realm, okay? But then as the spectrum moves to the right, it's really endless, because outside of those things that I'm not going to do, there are so many things that I can improve on with what I'm doing now. Okay, so we establish a stopping point on the left and so much opportunity to the right along that spectrum. So you want to identify your red lines and look for alternatives to those red lines. So if I don't like Brussels sprouts or beets, then maybe I can look at other types of vegetables to augment or to supplement my diet so that I can get the same types of nutrients and the same things that I need from those types of foods and vegetables. So those are the two broad pillars. The first is that you want to start with the healthy things, those healthy characteristics that you already do, and consider your likes, right? And then make your healthy practices better. That's number one. Number two, identify your red lines, but look for alternatives to those red lines. Find out ways to kind of work around those things that you consider a no-go. Now, with these two pillars, notice that I didn't add one that said, I want you to reduce unhealthy habits. I didn't do that this time. Sometimes I do recommend that for those that I work with, but this approach is one that I use often as well. I go back to the quote I mentioned earlier. Again, the question has never been about understanding how to succeed. It's been about understanding why you aren't succeeding. You can't build your home on quicksand, and you can't build successes on limitations. So when you think about that quote, when it comes to dieting, providing limitations in the sense of don't do this or that, or don't eat this or that, that direction has a negative connotation and a negative effect. More importantly, a negative effect from a behavior change psychology standpoint. And I firmly believe that if you're able to incorporate enough healthy habits, then those will eventually replace those unhealthy habits. You know, I recently completed a nutrition assessment where I noticed that the individual was eating a lot of processed foods. But instead of telling him to cut back on processed foods, I simply advised that he add fruits and vegetables to his diet because he wasn't consuming any fruits or vegetables. And those healthy additions indeed replaced some of the processed foods, and now he's tracking along very nicely. Now, a notable exception to this is when you're doing something that is so detrimental to your health that it should be stopped immediately. And again, the obvious example is something like smoking. But I try to keep the focus on adding or incorporating healthy habits versus telling you to stop doing something. Focus on the positives, seek to improve, and make your habits better, not perfect. Now, before I leave you, I want to just remind you that the show notes for this link or for this episode can be found at tdfitness.net/024. There you can listen, watch, or read. You can consume this content however you want. And there will also be links to all of the references that I mentioned in this episode. So again, remember, your personalized plan must focus on making your positive habits healthier and more frequent. Guys, thanks again for listening or watching or reading, however you're taking this in. I want you to have a blessed one. Coach T out.